If you're watching this right around the time I posted it, you're probably wondering where my Frank Zappa Waka Wazoo review is because that just came out. But it only came out 3 days ago, and I'm going to wait a week before I post it. So check back later this week. And I'm going to post it probably on Friday. Give myself a week to fully absorb it. But I'll give you a little spoiler alert. It's a positive review. It's a positive review. On to Supertramp. People, I'm Shaggy, the opinionated hippie, and today I'm going to be going down the Supertramp rabbit hole, ranking and reviewing their albums. Though I'll be perfectly honest right now, 4 or 5 of them I don't have a lot to say about because I kind of hardly ever listen to them. But then I have a lot to say about another 5, maybe another 6. But yeah, first off, how did we get here from Frank Zappa? Because everything on this channel is supposed to be related to Zappa. Richard Palmer was in Supertramp when they started, wrote a couple songs, and then later he wrote a bunch of lyrics for King Crimson. And we've already done King Crimson on this channel because of Adrian Belew. So thanks to Adrian Belew, we somehow arrive at Supertramp through Richard Palmer. So yeah, out of all the bands that I listened to back when I was in junior high, when I first started going down like the rabbit hole that is music, I don't listen to most any of them anymore just because either I don't want to say I've outgrown them because that seems to put some sort of like qualitative value on their music, and I don't want to do that. But either I've heard them way too many times and they offer nothing new at this point, like Led Zeppelin, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Rush to a degree, though there is one Rush album I still revisit quite often. There's one Iron Maiden album I still revisit quite often. But a lot of that stuff I've heard so many times, I'm like, I'd rather just listen to something new than revisit those albums at this point. Though, of course, there are always moments when I do. And then a lot of the stuff just holds no interest for me anymore. A lot of that early hard rock stuff, some of that more radio friendly like prog rock stuff I don't listen to anymore, just because it doesn't offer me anything. But Supertramp, I got into really, really heavily, probably one of the first bands I did thanks to Breakfast in America and its utter ubiquitousness, is that a word, in the world. It was everywhere back in 79, 80. My mom had it. My dad had it. My parents were divorced. My uncle had it. Everybody I know had this album. Paris was one of the first albums I bought. Might have been the first double album I ever bought, their live album. And though I only listened to 4 albums, the top 4 on this list, those 4 have never, ever left my rotation. I still absolutely love each of them. I would argue that either one of those 4 could be anybody's number one. And if I was on a debate team and one of the top 4 on this list I had to defend as their best, I could defend any of those 4 as their best. The one that is my favorite now and the ranking that I have now is based on me listening to these so many times over the years that, some of them have almost become where I can't listen to them anymore, which is why they've fallen. But yeah, we'll get to that. But that's what this is. If you're not familiar with Supertramp, I think they have one of the most identifiable sounds in music. They have that, what is it, the Wurlitzer? The Wurlitzer, is that what it is? Piano sound, which just gives it that beautiful, beautiful bounce in their music. I think The Logical Song is the most obvious example of that. Just such a beautiful, beautiful sound, which is pretty much, it's an electric piano. The Wurlitzer sound combined with John Hollywell, who joined when they finally really became good. John Hollywell, Helliwell, pretty much playing anything you can play with your mouth, all kinds of wind and brass instruments, just adding beautiful textures. I am not a saxophone fan for the most part in rock music. There is an artist, some call him the boss. I think many of his songs are ruined by saxophone. God bless Clarence Clemens and all that stuff. Great person, I'm sure. But I don't like that sound. I think it ruins rock music. And we'll eventually get to that when we do the boss. But I don't think Halliwell does. He somehow makes it all work every time, whether he's like blowing a clarinet or a saxophone, or I think he's got flute sometimes. He works with this band. The rhythm section, I think, is one of the most economical, efficient rhythm sections in music. Like, they're not Definitely nowhere near like a Rush level, either in technicality or what they do, but the bass notes are always perfect. Almost so many songs have like a drop where they start off without bass and then the bass drops in and it just takes the song to another level. The drum fills are really like perfectly spread out. You don't get them that often, but when they're there, they propel the song forward. Just an incredibly tight, like purposeful, no notes wasted rhythm section. And I will say that even in like the albums I don't like, the production is usually pretty fantastic. And that it seems like, especially when you're listening to headphones, there's a lot going on, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot going on. And all of it's done for like really simple purposes. And it's really done just to like propel the song forward. I would describe them as a prog pop band. Definitely pop with prog leanings. I think their best stuff have the best balance of the two, obviously. I don't know, that's obvious. I don't know why I said that. But anyways, yeah, that's it. I think I've rambled enough about this band, but I love them. I love those top 4 albums. I think they're absolutely fantastic. So yeah, they have how many albums? They have, well, I'm going to count because I forgot how many it is. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. However, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to combine 2 of them for reasons I'll explain when I get there. And I'm going to add a 12th that I think technically could be a Supertramp album. And we'll get there. You'll know what I'm talking about when I get there. But anyways, yeah, thanks for checking in. If you stick around to the end, let me know what your favorites are. Let me know what I'm wrong about. Let me know why I'm an idiot. Let me know why I'm a genius. Let me know what you're doing. I don't care. I'm going to get on to the first album. Number 11 is this. Oh, one more thing. I want to compare Roger Hodgson's guitar playing to David Gilmour. I'm not going to compare it on sort of like an all-time great guitar player skill level, but almost any time Hodgson drops a guitar solo in a Supertramp song, it kind of serves the same purpose as I think Gilmour solos mostly do in like Pink Floyd songs, is they're not just solos where, hey, let's just take a 30, 45-second break and let the guitar solo do their stuff. The solos seem like essential to sort of the overall narrative thread of any given song. Like when you listen to Dogs, those solo breaks, especially I think it's the second one before you get to the spacey part and that one that's after the spacey part, like that song is made because of those solos. Like the way Gilmour plays, sort of the narrative drive that they have, just everything about them feel like essential to like the life of the song. And that's a way a lot of like I think Hodgson's solos remind me of. He has a very melodic feel to his solos. And it reminds me a lot of Gilmour, and it's not flashy. It's not like technically the most ridiculous stuff you've ever heard, but it is absolutely essential to the song. And I think the best Supertramp stuff have those type of Hodgson solos, which are just so perfectly placed and constructed. And yeah, if you go see them live, it's going to be the same solo like Gilmour's are, but it's got to be the same solo because it's like part of the fabric of the song. So yeah, I wanted to give him those props because I think he is a fantastic guitar solo, a fantastic guitar player, and his use of wah is always fantastic when he's like making those like awesome like wah noises in the back. Fantastic work. But I wanted to give him props because I do absolutely love him. Like when we get to the song Crisis, when we get to the album Crisis, What Crisis, those solos in Sister Moonshine, oh my gosh, those are just absolutely fantastic, like essential. Those remind me of Gilmour, I think, more than anything else. But anyways, yeah, that's enough. Let's now get on to the albums. Number 11 is 1987's Free as a Bird. This is their second album after Roger Hodgson left. So the sort of iconic lineup was a 5-piece with Rick Davies on keyboards and vocals, one of the principal songwriters, Roger Hodgson on keyboard and vocals and guitar, one of the principal songwriters, and then John Hollywell on saxophone and brass, Dougie Thompson on bass, Bob Siebenberg on drums and percussion. And so Hodgson left, and this was the second album without Hodgson. The first album without Hodgson kind of sounds like a Supertramp album. This one does not. They were definitely going for a different direction, a different vibe. There's a little more sort of electronic, 80s electronic on here. There's just an overall different feel. Still at times sounds like Supertramp because Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson, I think no matter what they're doing, kind of always sound like Supertramp. But it's not as Supertrampy. The songwriting is Supertrampy. Some of Davies' keyboard playing is Supertrampy. The fact that Davies is singing is Supertrampy. But the songs other than that just kind of sound like generic 80s stuff. There's maybe one good song, I'm Begging You, the first song on side 2. I kind of like, I think it's not a bad song, but for the most part, it's kind of just sort of like 80s adult rock. Kind of reminds me of Steve Winwood's solo career, what he was doing after he got successful with Back in the High Life, whatever that album was. Can't remember what the name of that album was. Was it Back in the High Life? Whatever album that was that brought him back to sort of the thing. This kind of sounds like that era of that. And again, I listened to this a couple times when it came out. I bought it because I was a big Supertramp fan back in high school. Hardly ever listened to it. It never really did anything for me. And other than knowing that I kind of like I'm Begging You, everything else on this album I think is kind of forgettable. I think there's another couple vocalists on here who play. Mark Hart, I think he toured with them and was singing. I honestly don't know. I know he co-wrote one of the songs on here. But again, I think it's just kind of a forgettable late 80s adult rock kind of album with little hints of Supertramp. I'm not even going to say magic, a little hints of the Supertramp sound kind of seeping in. But yeah, number 11, 1987's Free as a Bird. And I just don't have anything much to say about it because it's just kind of an uneventful album. On to the next one. Number 10 and number 9, I don't care where you put them. I don't care what order you put them in. 2002, their most recent, last album, I'm assuming, that they will ever do, Slow Motion, and then 1997's Some Things Never Change. Both of these, when they came out, was sort of heralded as like a return to the classic Supertramp sound, right? Don't have that sort of 80s technology, that 80s production seeping in. We're just kind of coming back to like the sound that Supertramp has. And again, Rick Davies is here. Mark Hart is still around, at least for the first one. I don't know if he's still on the second one. I'll check. You got John Halliwell, Bob Siebenberg. There is a different bass player, unfortunately, on Some Things Never Change. And then when we go to Slow Motion, I don't even know who's on that. It's the same lineup. Oh, no. Yeah, it's the same lineup that was on the first one. So you're missing the original bass player, at least that bass player in those classic lineup albums. And yeah, these two albums do sound more like earlier Supertramp. Again, they're not as proggy, though the first one I think leans a little more into the prog. No, the second one, Slow Motion, leans a little more into the prog than the first one. They both have prog moments. They both have pop moments. But I think ultimately it just comes down to the fact that I think a complete album of Rick Davies without sort of the Roger Hodgson as his foil, I just don't think work. I think maybe at this point in his career, Rick Davies is just not writing songs that are that compelling or that are interesting or that linger. Listen to each of these albums a handful of times just to see if like maybe there's something there I can discover and sort of latch onto and look forward to listening to when I return. But no, they don't. None of them really do anything for me. Like I will listen to them, and Halliwell will have like a good sax solo, or I think, he's playing flute or clarinet or other instruments on these. And like, I'm like, oh, that's pretty decent. But there's nothing on either of these that make me want to return to them. I think Some Things Never Change might sound better than Slow Motion. I think Slow Motion might actually be a little bit of a better album from my understanding, but for the most part, they're tied at 9 and 10. And I want to say that the last one, Slow Motion, was like not even officially released. It was like an online internet-only release. It does have a song from Richard Palmer James on it. Richard Palmer James, that's his name, right? The guy who was in King Crimson, or Connection, like a song that was written back, I think, like 70 or 71. Kind of need to hear that. But for the most part, just kind of a forgettable album. 2 albums, to my ears. I'm sure someone out there likes them. I don't. There's too much other music out there for me to spend time listening on these. Again, Not as adult contemporary as Free as a Bird, but kind of in that area with more like acknowledgments that they were once a prog band as to any like hardcore real prog action, but there are some lengthier songs that are a little more indulgent, just not as exciting as anything that they did prior to this. So anyways, number 9 and 10, put them wherever you want. I don't care. Some things never change, and Slow Motion, right? Some things never change. I think that's what it's called. Apparently some things do change because Roger Hodgson left the band and you just weren't as good as you were before. That's what changed. Sorry, guys. On to number 8. Number 8 is their second album, Indelibly Stamped. Came out in 1971, 3 days after my first birthday. I don't think I got this as a present. Don't remember. But yeah, this is the last of the ones that I don't ever listen to. I know there are people that do like this. This is not the classic lineup yet. It's just Roger Hodgson and Rick Davies and a bunch of other people. I really like their debut album. Their debut album had a lot more sort of a psych prog rock, a little heavier hitting with an absolutely phenomenal song that reminds me of the Antlers, the Hospice album. But this one seems to like go way more in a Beatles direction, and it seems like half of these songs like remind me of like just kind of lesser versions of Beatles songs from things like more of like a Let It Be type era, even things like that. That sort of like whatever they were doing in that kind of return to roots rock type thing. But then you got some acoustic stuff that kind of reminds me of the Beatles. I think like the one highlight on here called Rosie Had Everything Planned reminds me of a Beatles number. Yeah, there's not much on here that I think really stands out to me. A couple longer songs. But again, this is of their 11 albums. This is the fourth of the 4. The other 3 on this list that I just never ever listen to. Every once in a while I will revisit the first one, but this one I never have, just because it always reminds me of the Beatles, and though I never listened to the Beatles, that's another one of my junior high bands that I just don't listen to anymore because I've like outplayed those albums. This makes me want to go listen to the Beatles, and then I grab a Beatles album. I'm like, well, I know this too much. I'm going to go on to something else. So it just sends me into rabbit holes of other music. But yeah, don't really like it. I think it's just a pale imitation of another band, and I think they were much better on their first album, and I kind of wish they had continued in that vein rather than following this vein. But yeah, that's number 8, Indelibly Stamped. Number 7 is 1982's Famous Last Words. I don't ever listen to this one either, so the fact that I said there were only 4, however, I do have 2 songs on here that are on my like Supertramp playlists, so there is stuff that I mine off this, and they're both Roger Hodgson songs. But for the most part, I think the band, after the Breakfast in America tour and literally being the biggest band in the world for like a year, they were just at odds with each other. This is very much handful of Roger Hodgson tracks or handful of like Rick Davies tracks. Hodgson's tracks I think are more interesting, though they're also maybe the worst one on the album is the Hodgson track. The Rick Davies tracks again are mining sort of like other musical subgenres of rock. Like everyone kind of feels like an homage to like a 50s vibe or some other kind of maybe folk rock, something other vibe. And I just don't think they work. I just don't think they're that memorable. Again, they're not outright bad except for one of the songs on this album, but like they're nothing that I want to go back to and listen to. The second half of the album tries to be a little proggier and you get a couple lengthier songs, but ultimately I just don't think they work, and I just don't think they're that interesting. The highlights of the album, the opening song track Crazy has some really nice melodic sections. I really like what I guess is the chorus. Why do you have to be so crazy? And then it's nice little instrumental section after that. But then there are also parts of this song I absolutely hate. Learn if you will, learn if you won't. Just weird little sing-along section that I don't like. A lot of neat little pockets of melodies in this song. So it's an interesting song, and it's kind of a good way to kick off the album. But unfortunately after that, it's kind of all downhill. Put On Your Old Brown Shoes is just kind of a blah song by Rick Davies. It's Raining Again. I absolutely cannot stand. all over all over MTV and the radio back when it came out in 82, 81, 82, whenever it came out. I said earlier, right? Never liked the song. Bonnie's okay. Know Who You Are is just kind of forgettable. My Kind of Lady, an okay sort of like My Kind of Lady, like a doo-wop-y type thing. Almost reminds me of Oh Darling by the Beatles, McCartney's sort of tear-up number, but just nowhere near as awesome as that. But not a bad song. And then C'est Le Bon, which is a Hodgson song and has some absolutely beautiful sort of acoustic melodies in the beginning that I really like. The song is sort of kind of sounds like a follow-up to the Logical song about just being raised to like, believe one way or want to go one way, but then embrace the fact that I'm glad I have music. I'm glad I can like express myself through my love of music and art and all that stuff. So it's kind of the Logical song part two, but with a completely different musical vibe. But I don't think it's a very bad song. And then you get a Waiting So Long, like I think the longest track on this album, a Davy song, which has its moments, tends to be a little bit proggier, but is ultimately forgettable. And then Don't Leave Me Now, another sort of longer type proggier number by Hodgson, which they try to bring a little more weight and heft to this album, but ultimately I think are just kind of bland and forgettable. But yeah, I don't ever listen to this album, but I do have Crazy and C'est Le Bon on playlists because I don't think those songs are that bad. And I just really like the melody, the sort of the chord progression of C'est Le Bon. I think that's a really good. The song itself doesn't go the places I want it to go, but the arrangement is strong enough to save it for me. But yeah, that's number 7. On to number 6. Number 6 is their first album, Supertramp, which came out in 1970, right? I like this album, man. I think this is actually a pretty good album and has some actually really good songs on it. It opens up with this song called Shirley, which is kind of like a very proggy thing to do. You get a short 31-second version of it to start off, and then you get like the full 3-minute version to close the album. So I like that prog bookend the album thing. It's a Long Road and Try Again are pretty good, like aggressive kind of prog rockers for, the first real prog album to come out in 69, for this to come out in 70, this band was kind of right there with it. And I've mentioned this before about other bands and other albums. There's a couple of YouTube channels which have like, the one-hit wonders, lost psych rock bands. And, that's all they do is they upload like these albums that you've never heard of. And some of the stuff is absolutely fascinating. If Supertramp was not one of those, if they had not had their like second half of the 70s run, I think this album would find a home on one of those channels and would be one of those that people would listen to a lot. I actually think it's pretty good. It does have some slower parts. It's not a home run. Some of the stuff is sort of just like subpar folk prog or subpar psych folk. But the song Maybe I'm a Beggar has this vocal part in it in which I think Hodgson is doing the vocals. I think Hodgson sings almost everything on here. And then, or Richard Palmer, right? No, Hodgson does. I think sings quite a lot. I don't know. Hodgson and Palmer. I don't know. I have my CD. I didn't find it. I think Hodgson does the vocals. But this part that sounds like the Antlers. I don't know if you've ever heard them. And that album came out, I think it's like 2009, 2010, called Hospice. Utterly depressing, brilliant album. But there is a vocal part in here in which he sounds exactly like the guy from the Antlers, and it almost sounds like one of the opening track off Hospice, to be honest. It's what it sounds like. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad album. I think it's a pretty good 1970s, sounds like a 70s album, sounds kind of dated, but it's a pretty good proggy, psyche, folky, sort of super trampy album. I like it. Yeah, I got no complaints, man. No complaints about this one. And I do listen to it every so often. It's a pretty good album. My number 6, right? Their debut album, Supertramp. So I got 2 albums at number 5 because even though they were released about a year apart, I've always thought of them as like Outcast's Love Sexy, Speaker Box, The Love Below, Love Sexy, it's a Prince album. Speaker Box, The Love Below, which they each took like an entire album, and it was sort of a double album where they each sort of took the focus on each one. That's kind of feel like what this is. I feel like In the Eye of the Storm, Roger Hodgson's first solo album, and Brother Where You Bound, which is essentially Rick Davies' first solo album, just happens to have all the members of Supertramp with him who are still around, feel like they both sound like Supertramp albums. And I was going to rank them separately, and I think I would have put the Supertramp Brother Where You Bound first, maybe. But then I realized they're both about the same. And like side A of each album are almost duplicate sides, as far as like Rick Davies following one format and Roger Hodgson following the other. And so I decided to like just put them both at number 5. And I think they're both good albums. The Supertramp album, Brother Where You Bound, side A opens up with Cannonball, which was like the hit or the single off this. I really like that song. That's a good song. Love the energy. It's got a nice little, not really a jam section in the middle, but a nice long instrumental interlude with some really good horn work. Bum, bum, ba-da-da-dum, bah. Some nice horn work in there. That sounds nice. I think they had to bring in some extra like horn players to do that. I don't think it's all, what's his name? And then, so that's cool. And then it goes into a song called Still in Love, which is your typical sort of like Rick Davies sort of like a different version of something like Bloody Well Right or Ain't Nobody But Me, just kind of like that kind of guitar heavy, kind of like almost like, you know, weird start and stop type energy that he has. Then we go into a ballad called No In Between. And then we have this sort of like over the top, sort of Cold War era, propaganda-y, like grandiose song called Better Days to close side A. First 2 songs I like, kind of tails off for the second 2 songs. The Roger Hodgson album is almost the exact same thing. Opens up with an absolute, I'm going to use this word, I hate it, proggy, indulgent banger, 8.5 minutes of Had a Dream, Sleeping with the Enemy. Opens up with this really long section of like noises and ambient noise, and then the piano comes in and it's really upbeat, like dun 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 dun. I mean, really upbeat. Some great guitar work in here. You have this weird little interlude where he once again references Mary. Mary seems to be his favorite woman. But yeah, really neat song. And then I think it goes right into a song called In Jeopardy, which is almost kind of sounds like Still in Love off the Supertramp album. This weird stop and start type thing, kind of funky, kind of some weird keyboard synth noises. But then you get a ballad, Lovers in the Wind, and then you get another song called Hooked on a Problem, which I don't think is as good as the first 2. So almost like a duplicate, sort of like mirrored. This is Rick Davies' version, this is Roger Hodgson's version. But then we get to side 2. And it is side 2 where I think ultimately the Supertramp Brother Where You Bound rises above the Hodgson album, because it's one song, 1.5 songs. There's a 16.5 minute song, and then there's like a 3-minute little ballad at the end. But the 16.5 minute song is your typical Pink Floyd-ish prog epic. It is so Pink Floyd-ish that David Gilmour plays guitar on it. So yeah, we get that. And it kind of reminds me of like anything off Animals. You get about the first half is roughly like playing around with roughly the same musical themes. Right? It's very ponderous. It's very heavy. It's very, hey brother, where you bound? It's very serious. And then about halfway through, you get about another 4 or 5 minutes of this sort of like Dogs echo-ish, sort of the music drops out. You get some piano tinkering. Then you get this absolutely beautiful guitar part that is just amazing. And they kind of it provides like the foundation of like kind of like a Shine on You Crazy Diamond, this amazing guitar part, and then they layer things on it, and then it kind of gets back into more like a rock groove, and we finish the song kind of repeating themes from the earlier portion of the song. I like this song. I like the indulgence. I like that Rick Davies was like, hey man, we're just going for this sidelong epic on this thing. I don't care. I think it works. Gilmour's presence obviously adds to it. And again, I made the Gilmour reference earlier. So again, it's interesting because I think Hodgson probably could have done this and probably could have executed it. Maybe not as well as Gilmour, but like his approach to playing, I think would have fit this well. And so I think it's a great side of music. And I think the opening Cannonball and The Brother Where You Bound are so good that it makes this better than the Hodgson solo album. The Hodgson solo album has 3 songs, all kind of remind me of like Give Me Love, Give Me Life, kind of reminds me of Babaji off Only in the Quiet Moments. I'm Not Afraid is another sort of mid-tempo type of like lengthy Roger Hodgson, slightly prog pop song. And then Only Because of You is a much slower, more dramatic, more drawn out thing that kind of works, kind of doesn't work. And the 3 songs together are good, but not quite as good as Brother, Where You Bound. So yeah, I put these both at number 5 only because Hodgson is not a a Supertramp album. But if you do like Supertramp and you've not checked out the Roger Hodgson album, this one in particular, he has 3 of them. I don't think the other 2 are very good. That's why I didn't include them on this list. I like this one, and I think that opening "Sleeping with the Enemy Had a Dream" track is pretty infectious and some pretty good pop candy in a pure Supertrampian way. But yeah, that's number 5. And now we're on to the classic 4. And I don't care where you put them. Any of these next 4 could be your number 1. And I agree with you. At one point in time, each of these was my number 1. But this is where I put them now. Yeah, that's my number 4, Crime of the Century. I know, man. Attack me all you want. This was my number 1 for a while, pretty much based on the strength of the first side and the last song. Because I have to admit, I don't like Dreamer. I've never liked the song Dreamer. It bothers me. I don't know why. I've never liked it, never enjoyed it. It's the one thing on this album that just kind of hinders it being higher. And even when this was my favorite album, I just sort of like, it's what, 3 minutes long, 3.5 minutes long. I just endured it because everything else was so good. But I don't like Dreamer. So there's that. And so when it came to doing these top 4 for this list, I was like, okay, they're all kind of equal in my mind. So I went through and I was like, there are 2 songs on this album I don't like. Dreamer, and I think if everyone was listening, it's just kind of there. It works because it's between Rudy and Crime of the Century, which are utterly fantastic. Side A of this album is a perfect side of music, probably their best side of music. Opens up with School, a great prog rock epic in 5.5 minutes. There are so many different little sections in this. They all work so epically. It's a beautiful song. So many ideas here Pink Floyd would take and like turn into like The First Side of the Wall or that whole, another brick in the wall type idea. Bloody Well Right. We all know that song. Great song, fun song, great guitar work, phenomenal. Hide in Your Shell, one of Hodgson's best vocal performances, especially live on that Paris album. He adds a couple little more vocal runs that aren't on this version that are absolutely fantastic. Love the lyrics to this song. And Asylum, Davy's weird little piano bass thing about, going insane. And the vocal performance on this is great and it's fun. And Hodgson comes in and there's a little interplay between them. Just a fantastic number. And then we get side B, Dreamer, which I don't like. Rudy, kind of like reminds me a lot of School, just this sort of little mini prog epic in like 7.5 minutes with so many moving parts, some great little instrumental part in the middle of it. Another just really kind of atmospheric set piece. If everyone was listening, and the absolutely epic Crime of the Century, just an awesome song. The ending of this with just that da-na-na-na-na-na-na, that piano part repeated over and over, and then they just layer all these different parts onto it, and it just goes on, and then Halliwell steps up and just blows his brain. Doesn't blow his brains out. That's crazy. Blows his sax out. Just a fantastic song to close this album. But yeah, really, really good. Really great album. I just don't like Dreamer, so it falls to number 4, and that's pretty much why. Yeah, okay, on to number 3. Number 3, 1979's Breakfast in America. Another perfect album. This is only here because everybody I knew owned this album in like 79 and 80. I remember once my uncle owned this album, my mom's youngest brother, and we were driving out to somewhere in the desert from Southern California one night, meeting up with the rest of the family. And we listened to this album as we were driving out, heading out towards the the 15. And then when it ended, I asked if we could play it again because I enjoyed it so much. I was like, must have been 10 or 11 at the time. So we played it again. It was on a cassette. We just let it play through. And then when it finished the second time, my uncle was like, hey, why don't we just listen to it again? So I remember listening to that album like 3 straight times, loving every single second of it. But it's one of those, it was my favorite for, who knows, probably a decade. But at this point, I've listened to it so much. Yeah, I'm not sure what it offers, other than just a great, great album. It does have one song I don't like. I don't really like Oh Darling. There was one of the songs off either, I think it's Some Things Never Change, or maybe the first song off Slow Motion. I think it's the first song off Slow Motion, kind of mines an Oh Darling territory. That's why it kind of sounds so familiar. And when I listen to this album and I get to Oh Darling, I don't really like the beginning, but during the middle of it, I'm like, oh yeah, this isn't that bad of a song. I just don't ever look forward to it. Everything else on this album is just almost perfect. Opens up with Gone Hollywood, which is kind of this, it's about moving to Hollywood and just sort of the disappointment of what life is like in LA. I grew up there, and yeah, I hear it. But it's kind of one of their more proggy things, has some different parts. Hodgson has some lyrics in it. And then it's nice because the last song on the album is also a longer, proggier one with a nice little jam at the end and kind of just a very like, very proggy, keyboard-driven sort of like rocker to close it out. So it's nice that with all the utterly perfect pop songs on this album, the opening and closing are 2 of the more indulgent pieces, which I like. They're kind of keeping their foot in like prog, the prog territory for that. Logical Song, one of the greatest pop songs ever. I mean, nothing sounds like this. From that Wurlitzer electric piano to where the bass drops in after the intros, to the fact that you got verse, chorus, verse, and then you go off into a solo. The ending with the weird sound effects, just an absolutely perfect song. Goodbye Stranger, amazing little guitar solo at the end. Hodgson doing his Hodgson thing. Breakfast in America, stupid fun. Oh Darling, Take the Long Way Home. Another just epic, epic pop song. Just love the sound of this. This has like a real piano and not the electric piano, and just everything about this song is perfect. Lord Is It Mine, a slower Hodgson ballad about, tapping into his spirituality again. Just Another Nervous Wreck, kind of like the Mirror song, like side 2's version of Goodbye Stranger. They both kind of have kind of a similar vibe with some epic guitar playing in it. Casual Conversations, just a beautiful, beautiful song. Short little ballady number by Davies. And then the absolutely phenomenal Child of Vision to close out. Just a great, perfect album. A great pop album. Biggest album of the world in 79 and 80. Yeah, this is definitive Supertramp right here. And if I hadn't heard it as many times as I heard it, it'd probably be number 1. But at this point in my life, it's not. So yeah, on to number 2. Number 2 is 1977's Even in the Quietest Moments. Greatest album cover ever. I love this album cover. That one right there, wherever corner that is. 2 of my all-time favorite Supertramp songs are on this album. That'll be in my song list if you want to know what those are, though I'm sure I'll accidentally point them out as I discuss this. Only 7 songs, a little just their quietest album, I would say. It's got some prog epicness on this, but this definitely has a folkier side, definitely a quieter side, sort of a slow burner where you have Crime of the Century, Breakfast in America, and then the 2 albums in between, which are this one and the one that's number 1, are sort of your more low-key, slow-burning albums, which over the years I've just come to love more because I didn't listen to them as much early, and so now I'm really, really appreciating all the genius that they have. This opens up with Give a Little Bit, which is one of those songs that I've heard way too many times on the radio. I know it's now in commercials, and so I've heard it in commercials. And I used to skip Give a Little Bit and the second song, Lover Boy, and I would start at track number 3 when I listen to this. But recently I've been sort of forcing myself to start at the beginning, and I find out that even though the intro of Give a Little Bit, I'm just like, oh, this song, I don't need to hear it. But like, again, by the time I get into the middle, and by the time they've sort of changed tempo or just kind of, dropped into like a little proggy middle section that's just a little bit not a common radio trope or a common prop trope. I'm like, yeah, this is pretty good, man. And I can get behind the sentiment. I can get behind, Hodgson is a very, I like my music dark. I like it a little more like edgy. And like Hodgson is not always that. Hodgson is a very spiritually pure, happy person. And this is like one of those pure, happier songs. But I've come to really love it over the years. Next is Loverboy, which I'm hit and miss on. It does have a fantastic, I think the second verse of this is fantastic and things get weird and there's all those little musical interjections. I think it is by far the weakest song on the album. But again, it's grown on me over the years. But then comes the next 5 songs is just a perfect run of music. Even in the quietest moments, just might be the best thing they've ever done. Downstream, a little piano-driven Davies ballad, just about being alone in a boat going downstream, either with a person or with a spirit. Not sure if it's a religious allegory or not, but a beautiful song. Then we get Babaji, a full-on spiritual sort of Roger Hodgson driven lengthy pop song that's like 7.5 minutes, feels longer than it is. It's like 5 minutes long. But a very vocal driven kind of Roger Hodgson song. You get the absolutely fantastic From Now On, the Davies number From Now On. Really nice piano work in here. And then the Fool's Overture, their definitive prog epic with the beginning of this, the opening piano part, and just I think it's Hodgson solo playing like a piano part. I'm assuming it's Hodgson, is just, no, maybe it is if it's piano. Yeah, no, it is Rick Davies. So sorry, Davies, I'm giving you credit for that. Absolutely beautiful piano intro. And then you get some vocals and you get some weird little like ambient noises coming in with like tape recordings of like leaders in the past yelling things. And then this over the top sort of epic jam, keyboard driven jam at the end, and just a fantastic over the top prog epic. Just, yeah, a stupidly good album. And really, it jumped all the way to number 2 because, like I said, 2 of my all-time favorite songs are on here, and they are so good and so perfectly Supertramp that this can only be number 2. But on to number 1, man. On to number 1. Number 1, Crisis. What Crisis? 1975's Crisis. What Crisis? Absolutely love this album. This was probably like my number 4 for a good long while when I first got into them, easily. I had Crime of the Century, Breakfast in America, and even in the quietest moments above this. And then over the years, over the decades, it's sort of inched its way up to number 1. It is sort of the slow burner. It is their quiet masterpiece. Everything they do, that they do so well is on here. All those fancy like songs where they start off with just acoustic, or it's just like, a keyboard and then the bass drops in. There are so many good bass drops and drum drops on here that are fantastic. The bass playing is just fantastic. It's not like Geddy Lee crazy, but it's just the perfect notes at the perfect time. Side A might be my second, maybe my first favorite side of Supertramp music. Starts off with this little 2.5 minute Easy Does It, this like cute little acoustic number that just has this really irresistible melody that I absolutely love. That goes into Sister Moonshine. You're like very almost like a precursor to Give a Little Bit, very like acoustic guitar oriented with layers of them. There's amazing bass drop that comes in after like the first set of vocals. Weird little vocals, Sister Moonshine, won't you I just love this song. It's just such a feel-good upbeat number. You get an awesome Davies sort of rocker, and Ain't Nobody But Me has some fantastic like backing vocals by Halliwell and Hodgson. Has a great jammy guitar part, kind of like Bloody Well Right. Another weird, quirky little proggy ballad in Hodgson's A Soapbox Opera. Again, this might be about religion, I'm not sure, but some lyrics that I'm not sure what they're about, but they're kind of mysterious enough to be intriguing. And then the sort of epic jammy, Another Man's Woman, with like a nice outro jam at the end and some really good piano playing on this and some good wah guitar that drops in here. Very nice 70s sounding like jammy number. And then the ultimate sleeper side of any Supertramp album, like the sleeper side, and every song on here is so good. It's just not filled with your hooks, or it's not as over the top, but man, are these some slow burning classics. Lady, Hodgson song, kind of like a better version of Dreamer. Starts off with some percussion, then you get sort of some Dreamer type piano vibe, and then you get a bass drop in there that just propels the song forward. Then you get some more vocals and kind of things go back to the beginning, and there's another bass drop about a minute and a half into it that is fantastic. Just some great bass playing in here, and then a nice sort of proggy fade out ending. Poor Boy, a Davy song, which has a weird little intro with some like chicken noises. Almost sounds like he's going I'm doing some like kind of scat singing, but then just some really nice vocals and a really nice sort of piano driven ballady type thing. Just a Normal Day, sort of a slow burning, creepy little like sort of, they both sing on this, which is kind of neat. That and The Meaning are both sort of like a little more somber and intense and quieter, but with some nice little prog parts. And again, every once in a while a drum part comes in or a bass part comes in. It just kind of keeps the landscape varied throughout the durations of the song. And then Two of Us, the phenomenal Two of Us. I think I do like I think it's Hodgson alone on acoustic guitar, maybe on Paris. I like that version a little better. I'd heard the Paris version first, and when I came here, I thought this one was a little more, they have diffused the guitar a little more, where it's a little less sort of like direct and forceful, but I still think it's just a beautiful sort of like album closing ballad to close out, I think, without a doubt, my favorite album at this point, their sleeper album of all sleeper albums. But yeah, just such a fun album. But anyways, yeah, that's my number one right now at this point in my life. Crisis? What crisis? And that's it, people. That's my ranking of my favorite Supertramp albums on this cold Texas day. So let me know what your favorites are. Let me know why I'm wrong. Let me know what I need to revisit. Share your thoughts on things. You know how this works. It's comments, it's YouTube. But yeah, like, subscribe, share, and most importantly, the reason why this channel exists. Go listen to music, people. Go listen to music. It makes life better. That's all I got, y'all. Peace. Talk to you later.